Hi, this is just a screencast to follow up from the session on Wednesday, which a number of you missed. We didn't record the session because 90% of it was actually time in workshops. So I'm just going to outline what we did and then give you the last few slides of the presentation, talk through those because we didn't get to covering those on Wednesday. So the session was planned to talk a bit about advanced communication skills. So we spent one workshop looking at some of the challenging situations that you had identified as a group the week before. And there is a role play document on the Blackboard page where you can have a look at some of the scenarios that we tried to work on. And after each of these workshops, we had a brief discussion on what had come up and what the learning points were. We then went on to look at the use of importance and confidence rulers, which you had a YouTube video to look at prior to the session. And there were, some views on these and how easy they were to use or how difficult. But the key thing was around that using them only when they're really necessary. So these aren't tools you're going to use for every consultation. They are tools that can be useful on occasions, particularly when patients are a bit stuck. So those who are wanting to change, but for one reason or another, it's just not working for them. They're just not able to make the behaviour change that they want. So the kind of areas that it might be really useful are things like in weight management, where people aren't succeeding in losing weight, or they're not sure whether they actually really want to have a go. Often that can be used to due to lack of self-esteem, lack of confidence. So it's really helpful to explore how important a change is to somebody on how confident they might be about making that change. And the importance if you explore that, you may find that actually there is a misunderstanding about the benefit of change and the benefit of the dietary changes. So sometimes it gives you that opportunity to explore a little bit further and help people to understand why dietary change is important, and then to work with their confidence and try and boost that. So I spent about half an hour, so everybody had a go of doing that, and then some feedback. And then the last session was using the ambivalence grid, or otherwise known as decisional balance. And some people found this a bit clunky. They thought it felt a bit regimented, and does it really matter what order you do it? So some of the questions that came up in relation to that, do you need to go through all of the aspects of it? So we talked about doing that in a constructive way. And one of the learning points was that sometimes the benefits of change and the difficulties with not changing are similar. So the opposite sides of the square can be quite similar. So how do we do that without getting people to repeat themselves? And if they've started talking about something, but that's led on to another part of that grid, do we get them to repeat it again? And I think this is where your active listening skills are really important, because one of the most important things with using any of these tools is demonstrating that person-centered approach with active listening. So what I would suggest is that you think about, if someone's started talking through the benefits of them not changing, that you summarize that before you go on to the next part. Or if they have talked quite a lot and already covered something that should fit in one particular section, say, so you've already mentioned this as would be part, this would fit into this next section of this. Is there anything you'd like to add? So you're demonstrating your active listening. You're not making the patient repeat themselves as if you haven't heard them. And you're making that flow a little bit better. And the other thing is, you don't just launch into using one of these tools. You're going to introduce it and say that, sometimes when people are struggling with change, it can be helpful to think through the pros and cons and what life might be like in 6 months, if you have changed or if you haven't changed. Would you like to do that? So you're not saying this is what I need to do in order to get you to work out what's going on, but you're offering them as an option. So if they say, yes, that sounds great, then you've got that tool, you've got their permission to use it. So again, not a tool that you use with everybody, often used in long-term conditions like obesity or diabetes or eating disorders. And you're exploring that quite a lot. So we had all of those workshops and brief discussions after those. But what we didn't get onto was talking about future learning. So I'm going to just go through that for a few minutes. So what I was trying to convey was that the session that we did was an introduction to using those skills. And what you've had throughout your course has been a very good starting point. And hopefully you'll all then get to that competent point and then go on to graduation and start work. So you've been taught lots of different skills and you've got things that can be further developed. So where do you go when you're qualified to develop further? And do you need to? Well, I think the evidence suggests that we do need to. And what I would suggest is that if you've been in work 6 months to a year, you think, right, where am I going with this? Do I need to develop any further? And if you're thinking that you might need to, I've given you here some ideas of places that you can look further. So there are courses on behaviour change, some of which would overlap with what you've done so far. But when you get into the work environment, it all takes on a slightly different perspective, because what you will recollect, going from B placement to C placement, the expectations go up, and the expectations go up when you're a graduate as well. So there are courses. I've given you a couple of examples here. One from University College London. They do some bigger courses, perhaps master's courses, modules you can do. BCT Online is run by dietitians, a very, very experienced team who've been training in behaviour change courses face to face for a long time, but they've now changed an awful lot that to be online. And that's really useful. Very experienced, mostly dietitians, but also some psychologists, clinical psychologists involved in that as well. The motivational interviewing course run by the BMJ, a lot of people find very helpful. It's just an hour. You get a certificate for learning. And it just kind of gives you a little bit more information and helps you to think through how you might implement motivational interviewing into your work. It's not a full motivational interviewing course. You'll find most of those will be a couple of days, but it is going to give you some really useful pointers and help to consolidate some of the learning so far. There are also courses on cognitive behavioural strategies, and BCT Online do some of those. You can access courses on mindfulness, which may be relevant to some conditions. And I think one of the ways it can be really relevant is because it's so useful with stress management and anxiety management. And that is often a cause of poor eating habits. So it's really worth thinking through, might that be useful for something for me to do with some of my patients? Sorry, I had to stop there to sneeze and then lost my place in the slides. Functional imagery training is a really interesting, relatively new idea. And that can be a really useful adjunct, particularly if you're working in weight management. It's about getting people to think through what they want to achieve, what they want to be at the end of the day with their dietary change. It's often used in obesity, and this paper is quite interesting because it gives you an idea of what functional imagery training is, but also it demonstrates that it actually is more successful than traditional weight management strategies. And it really is about getting people to think, right, what do I want to be? clothes do I want to be able to wear? What do I want to look like? And building up a really strong mental image in their heads that they can draw on when they are struggling with a decision. Do I have that extra packet of crisps or not? And it can then bring people back and say, actually, no, because if I have that, that is not going to take me to that mental image that I am aiming for. So worth exploring. They do training days down at the University of Plymouth on that, and it's something I'm wanting to do myself, actually. I think it would be really interesting and maybe useful in certain circumstances. The DietComs training package I'm going to come back to a little bit later, but this is just an online resource that is completely open access, has a lot of different resources, including videos of bad, reasonable and good consultations in a variety of different scenarios, a lot of guidance sheets, and it was updated in 2020, so completely free for you to access. Everything is downloadable. It is accredited by the BDA, so a useful resource to go back to for a whole host of reasons, which I'm going to explain a bit later. Just to talk briefly about peer observation. So peer observation does happen in some dietetic departments, and it's a way to revisit how you are doing. And it's where members of a group, so a department, will work with each other and to judge which, how different members of that group are achieving things. So it's been used in healthcare an awful lot, and there are guidance documents on how to do it. And you will have done that throughout your student time. But what is different is you take it into the workplace, and there is a good evidence base, particularly for communication skills. So about a quarter of the profession were using this back in 2007 when we did our first BDA membership survey. And that had gone up slightly when that was repeated in 2018. But what it does, it helps you become much more aware of your skill level. It can also really change attitudes and help people to reflect and make efforts to develop their skills. So there is evidence that it leads to improved consultations. And recently we did some work in Australia. So this was using the DietComs tool, and I was working with a department in Sydney, and they did peer observation. They did some training, and they did peer observation again, using DietComs to actually assess the consultations. And they found that overall the standard was very good, but for those who weren't so good, they were the ones that had the greatest level of improvement. So it was really quite useful for them to have a look at that. So we can see that there are ways that it can actually be useful for improving skill level in practice. So if you want to look at more information about using peer observation, there is a guidance sheet on using peer observation on the DietComs training package. As you're moving into a transition of moving into practice, there will be different ways that you communicate and different things that you need to think about. And one of the first things you're going to be doing is teaching and assessing students, and that will happen relatively quickly. In most departments, you will have to go on a training course, facilitation of learning first, but there are key things that you need to be able to do for that. And one of those is giving constructive feedback when observing or assessing. And because you've been there so much so recently, what that feels like. It's really important that the feedback you get is constructive. So how do you go about doing that? There is guidance on assessing yourself if you can't get a department engaged in doing peer assessing. Some information on dealing with negative experiences. So some of those challenging consultations that we've talked about and how you might have experienced something that's perhaps upset you and caused some anxiety in yourselves. Thinking more about follow-up appointments rather than the first appointment with somebody. Group education and how you can use your communication skills to better facilitate those. And then also communication and telehealth. So there's some guidance there. They're all referenced. They will all send you on to further information if you are interested in doing that. So I just wanted to give you that, to give you a bit of idea of where to go next and what else might be useful. And I hope that's helpful to you.